Hello, and welcome to the influence of photography and collage art on social justice. Before we get started, please join me in a land acknowledgement. The UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and original people of the area where our campus is located. The university was built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We are honored to share this space with them, and we thank them for their stewardship. This land acknowledgement was adapted from the UCSD Intertribal Resource Center. Another note before we get started, I would like to make a quick disclaimer. I will be using Google Slides closed captioning, so some words and phrases that are translated may not be 100% accurate. Now, a little bit about me. So, hello, my name is Tiffany Wajaja, and my gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am currently the Common Ground social media and marketing intern, as well as a social justice educator for the Cross Cultural Center. I am a clinical psychology major, as well as a photography minor. Now, why did I choose this presentation? Well, I chose this presentation because I have a growing passion and admiration for photography, and essentially, my appreciation and passion for photography grew after learning about how photography can have a huge impact on not only the person taking the photo, but also the individual who is being photographed or subject that is being photographed. Another one of my bullet points is versatility, and I really love how photography is very versatile and has different forms such as collaging, which is written in the parentheses, and I will go over what that is later on in the presentation. So a presentation overview. The first part of this presentation is that I will be going over the history/origins of photography, and then I'll be moving along to discuss how photography has made itself salient in social justice. And then I will talk about collaging or montage art as a form of art and social justice. And the final part of this presentation will be a how-to session of how to make a digital collage tutorial. So first, history of photography. A quick timeline that I would like to go over. It first started with the invention of the camera obscura, and then during the 1800s was the discovery of the daguerreotype, and then moving along to the 1880s was the invention of analog photography, and then finally the 1900s, the discovery/creation of Kodak's brownie box. Now, what were all the terms that I described? What do they mean? Well, camera obscuras used darkroom techniques and had a small hole in the room that projects an inverted image on the opposite side of the wall. Daguerreotypes resulted in a very detailed image. They were usually of portraits on a sheet of copper plate and silver that used light and developed over hot mercury to produce an image. Analog photography, similar to film photography, employs chemical reactions, and Kodak's brownie box uses similar and simple functions to a digital camera because it has a shutter, it plays with light, and has lenses that are used to control light exposure. I have included some pictures. So for the camera obscura, there is that small pinhole that I was talking about that projects an inverted image on the opposite side of the wall of the darkroom, and the artist is painting the image being projected upside down, and then when they're done, they can flip it right side up. And then here are some examples of daguerreotypes. As you can see, they're very detailed photos, and they were developed over hot mercury. For analog photography, I just added some photos of film, and then finally Kodak's brownie box. I just want to say this is so cute. It looks like a brownie, and I think it's so cute. Moving on to the presentation. More information about the history of photography. Photography was initially trusted to be a documentation of truth, but it was later challenged after the discovery of new forms and realizations. One of the occurrences that gave photography new meaning was the introduction of ghost photography. So what do I mean by new meaning? New meaning because originally, since photographs were seen as a form of truth, evidence, and documentation, they were essentially used to prove that something happened. And so for there to be images of supernatural occurrences introduced a new perspective into taking and viewing photographs. In the image shown in this slide on the right side, it is a photograph of Arthur Conan Doyle in ectoplasm. The image essentially shows a medium exhaling, exuding, or releasing spirits of Arthur Conan Doyle. This was seen as supernatural and shocking to the public because, as mentioned before, photographs were seen as truth and a form of documentation of a real-life event. Moving on to the iconoclastic tradition and Plato's cave and the image as an illusion. When photography was discovered and invented during the 1800s, there were attitudes in which people had about the truthfulness and realness of visual images. The two attitudes were the iconoclastic tradition and Plato's cave and the image of illusion. The iconoclastic tradition refers to how photography is not a good indicator of truth. An example of this can be seen in Christianity, where religious leaders would find images that brought feelings of discomfort and destroy them because they do not correlate with their beliefs and because they are believed to not be real. In a sense, the iconoclastic tradition convinces us that truth can't be perceived by the senses, but one should ascend to a higher level to be able to know the truth. In Plato's Cave of Illusion, it introduced the belief that a story is meant to represent human knowledge. So Plato's Cave is basically the opposite of the beliefs of the iconoclastic tradition because it brings people to rely on their senses to make perceptions about the world. In Plato's cave / the Platonic cave was where people would be able to watch these shows that used lighting and manipulated it to create shadows to tell fantasy stories while using the shadows to represent fiction but closely realistic scenarios. Some more information on the history of photography. The first bullet point is the earliest types of photography were only accessible to people in the upper class. To elaborate on this, to have your photo taken, you had to be some person in the upper class of society, which in most cases is measured by wealth. And to own a camera was very expensive because you had to know how to operate one. And there are limitations to owning a camera, which makes them inaccessible to people who did not know how to use one. The second bullet point is the invention of Kodak's brownie box, which made photography more widespread and accessible. So it made photography accessible to the greater public because you didn't really need to have extensive knowledge on how to operate a big clunky camera, as well as know how to develop the photos like the daguerreotypes, which employed chemical reactions. And the third bullet point, I would like to highlight an article published by the New York Times. It's titled "The Racial Bias Built into Photography." In the article written by Sarah Lewis, they highlight the issue of how photos developed from early cameras would favor lighter skin tones over the skin tones of people of color. And on the next slide, I have a quote from the article. The quote reads, "Light skin became the chemical baseline for film technology, fulfilling the needs of its target dominant market." And this quote was from the article that was mentioned earlier, written by Sarah Lewis. Another quote that stuck out to me while I was reading the article was made by Lorna Roth. And it says, or they say color contrast made it nearly impossible to capture a diverse group. However, one of the good things about the article is that it highlights the progress and push towards progress. And so the article states that researchers of the MIT Media Lab have been working on an algorithm to correct the bias in digital imaging technology. Moving on to the second part of our presentation, photography and social justice, we will be going over how photography has made itself salient in social justice. First, I'll be starting off by introducing photography and its use in westward expansion. So during the 1800s, photography was used as a means to expand colonization. Photographers would document and attempt to romanticize the struggles of indigenous individuals who essentially were having their land taken away from them. This brings us to our next bullet point, cabinet cards. So similar to carte de visites, which translate to visiting cards, they were photos you would take of yourself or family and give them to other family members or friends or literally anyone you wanted to send a photo of yourself or family to for the most part. And after the use of photography grew in popularity in regard to westward expansion, cabinet cards were used and distributed. These were distributed photos of people who were different races or anyone who was seen as different. Focusing on the Native Americans, photographers would, as mentioned earlier, romanticize, publish, and even falsify the struggles of the Native Americans. I remember there was this one photo in my Viz 158 class where the professor showed the differences between the same photo, but one photo was edited. And so this photo was taken during the 1800s when photography was used in westward expansion of Native Americans just hanging out. There was like a clock in the background, but the photographer edited the clock out to make it seem that these individuals were living lifestyles that weren't as progressive as other lifestyles. And so I would like to also mention an article titled Marketing the Exotic, Creating the Image of the Real Indian, written by Antonia Valdez da Pena. The author highlights that the distribution of cabinet cards during westward expansion could be seen as an act of establishing dominance of a specific race over another. Moving on to our third bullet point, documentation of society. So Paul Strand and Jacob Rees were social documentary photographers who photographed people of the lower class on sidewalks. This had the same approach to the cabinet cards and the romanticizing of struggle. In the photo presented on the left, there is an image of a blind woman that was taken by Paul Strand. Although one may look at this photo and possibly be inspired by this person's struggles, or maybe inspired by the image, it's actually really problematic. To highlight the things that are problematic with it, first things first, the woman is wearing a blind tag, which is dehumanizing. Second, photographers such as Paul Strand would roam the sidewalks and romanticize struggles of people and try to make it into art. One thing that social documentary photography inspired were slumming parties, and slumming parties could be defined as the practice where the upper class people would go to the underserved neighborhoods of their city to walk around and essentially look at how the individuals living on sidewalks lived. Another thing that was popular were poverty parties, and those were parties where people of the higher class and had a lot of wealth would throw parties with themes centered on poverty. Continuing our discussion about photography and social justice, I would like to highlight the definition of taxonomy. So taxonomy is a way to classify things. And our first bullet point, taxonomy and ethnic differences, it is essentially there to highlight how taxonomy bled into classifying things more than insects or types of butterflies or other things or bugs, but it made its way to social sciences and then it classified people. And people with physical features other than the average white and upper class individual were taken and displayed at human zoos. And the third bullet point says Theodore Roosevelt and the race suicide. So essentially with the rise of the push on a dominant race, Theodore Roosevelt introduced race suicide. At the time, the bourgeois class wasn't really reproducing as much. And so going back to Theodore Roosevelt and the race suicide, it was a concept that claimed that the European or white genotype was superior, and it became a crime for those who had those genes to not reproduce or have babies because it would mean that they were contributing to the race suicide. Social justice and photography today. So there is extensive research that's being conducted about whether or not body cameras can have an impact on policing. And I have a second bullet point there that says digital age of activism. So photography has allowed the sharing of information through social media, which leads to widespread access to information if you have social media or if you're on social media. And with the widespread and sharing of information, acts of solidarity through using hashtags and reposting content have been very impactful in spreading word and news around, which is why I included the photo on the right. It's from Twitter, and one part of the caption reads, "Mark Clennan's photograph has been viewed millions of times." I don't know about you all, but I've seen this photo pop up a lot on my feed and on Instagram stories. And just by reposting a photo, it can circulate and reach more and more people. And the cycle of seeing it and reposting it and raising awareness and displaying your activism continues. And also, the third bullet point reads social, cultural, personal documentation, and representation. So if you would like to check out some more work of marginalized artists who create art that highlights their personal experiences, you can check out the Cross Cultural Center's Instagram and Facebook, and keep a lookout for our art highlights, galleries, and etc. for more information about the works of marginalized artists. I will be giving out the Cross Cultural Instagram and Facebook at the end of the presentation, so stick around for that. Going to the third part of our presentation, collage art and social movements. So I will be talking about collaging as a form of art and social justice. Although I said collage earlier, the historical term for collage is photo montage. And with photo montages, artists discovered that for a photograph to have meaning, it doesn't just have to stem from one source or photo. And so I included the second bullet point highlighting Pablo Picasso and how they introduced the idea of reassembling units and concepts to make one whole piece out of multiple sources. Some famous photo montage artists are Alexander Rodchenko, John Hartfield, and Hannah Hoch. One thing that I would like to mention is that in one of Alexander Rodchenko's piece, they highlight meaning in how the world is not encapsulated by a single image and how meaning is not embedded in a single image, but is produced dialectically in between them. And I think it is really important to highlight the Dada movement or Dadaism, and the quotes on the slide explain it very well. In this first quote from tate.org.uk, it reads, "Dada was an art movement formed during the First World War in Zurich in negative reaction to the horrors and folly of the war. The art, poetry, and performance produced by Dada artists is often satirical and nonsensical in nature. And here are some examples of some montages during the Dada movement. This one is by Roald Hausmann. This is a piece by Pablo Picasso, and this one is by Hannah Hoke, and another one by Hannah Hoke. And it is just an assimilation of photographs or newspaper images and the like pasted into one source from many other sources. The last quote I will highlight by Man Ray reads, "Dadaism of Dada was a form of artistic anarchy born out of disgust for the social, political, and cultural values of the time. It was more a protest movement with an anti-establishment manifesto." And in the next slide, I will be showing a video of people reviewing the work of Hannah Hoke.
This amazing photo montage is by German artist Hannah Hoch, and it's from 1919 and has an extremely long title. Cut with the Kitchen Knife, Dada through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epic of Germany.
1919, that was a really pretty fraught moment. So what was going on?
Political chaos. The government has been completely changed after World War I. There's a lot of conflict between the Spartacists, the far left-wing communists, and the Freikorps was encouraged to attack people by members of the government. So there are all these clashes, and a lot of people end up getting arrested, and some people end up getting killed, and that's just one particular moment. January of 1919, all of that infighting happens.
So all this fragmentation is just beautifully captured here. The contrast from the kind of long war, which would have really focused the country's attention, and then this complete breakdown.
If you think about the title, Cut with a Kitchen Knife, think about the idea of cutting things, literally, right? That works for the photo montage. And she's cutting a swath through all this and piecing things back together in ways that make sense to her. Focusing on the fragmentation as defining culture at that moment.
I'm assuming most of these photographs came from newspapers, from magazines.
They did.
And so it's all immediate and topical and all relevant at this moment, but it's being reconstructed.
But I love that it's a kitchen knife.
She's very focused on the role of women artists. As a Dadaist, how was she treated? And she wasn't treated very well. I think one of the things she actually had a problem with is a lot of male Dadaists had grand ideas about changing cultural mores and views and gender equity, but then in their practice of that, they did nothing. There's a couple of ways that that is visualized here. If we look at the very central image, we actually see one of the foremost German expressionist artists, Katja Kollwitz. And the body underneath her is dancer Nidhi Impekoven. And if you look at the way that that forms a central point around which everything else rotates, and there is a sense of movement happening all at the same time. One thing I always think is really interesting is this tiny little head is actually Hannah Hoch. Instead of putting her signature, she puts up a little portrait of herself. And what it is it's actually pasted onto the corner of a map, which shows the countries in Europe that had women's voting rights at the time. So that's one of the ways that we know she was thinking about the role of women in society and in the art world. So first of all, if you think about this image in terms of quadrants, usually the right side is known as the anti-Dadaist. Now, the people that are in the anti-Dadaist corner are obviously politicians. Kaiser Wilhelm is right here. His head is really big, and this figure is quite large. She makes fun of Kaiser Wilhelm with this little figure of two wrestlers that are creating the mustache. So then there are also other political figures. There's General von Hindenburg, the head of him, on the body of this exotic dancer. Down here, there is German Minister of Defense, Gustav Noska, and he's talking to another general, and this general up here is standing on their heads. But if we go down here, in the lower right corner, we see the world of the Dadaist. Right here it says Dadaisten. So this is the corner that has Hannah Hoch and the map, and then it also has other Dadaist figures. There's the Dadaist Raoul Hausmann. Hannah Hoch had a relationship with Hausmann for a while, and for a long time, all of the literature on Hoch is referred to as the wife of Raoul Hausmann. Here you see the two heads of Dadaist George Gross and Wilhelm Herzfeld, the brother of John Hartfield, and Nidhi Impekoven, the same dancer that's in the center here, is now over here bathing John Hartfield in this bathtub. In here we have Lenin, and then there's another Dadaist, Johannes Bader, and then you see one of the Communist Party leaders, Karl Radek, and he was back and forth between Russia and Germany, so he's very involved with the Communist Party, Karl Marx. Then over here is the head of modern art critic and writer Theodor Daubler, and his head is on top of a baby's body.
So really infantilizing all of these people.
And then they're all men. On the left side, they're forms of Dada. This is Dada propaganda. This is Einstein right here, actually. And he is saying a couple of different things. Right here, this little bit of text is in German. And it says, young man, Dada is not an art trend. That it's not just something that's coming and going, and that it's actually something more meaningful. Now down here, there's a lot of scenes of mass gathering. So we see Karl Liebknecht, one of the German Communist Party leaders, along with Rosa Luxemburg, who were jailed, tortured, and then assassinated in January 19. He's saying, join Dada. Dada is going on all over Europe, and there are different centers of Dada. And they all have different art-making practices. And photomontage was central to the Berlin Dadaists.
Well, the whole notion of the kitchen knife is really empowering.
The idea of domesticity as being something that could undermine cultural values. It's amazing.
Now, as we saw in the video, the people highlight how Hannah Hoch's work was centered and very rich in information and had a lot of meaning that was conveyed on one single canvas, but the artist took a lot of their materials from other sources to make one giant piece. Alrighty, and that concludes the informational portion of our presentation. So if you would like, please join me in a session of how to make a collage or photo montage digital tutorial on Photoshop. And a small disclaimer, by no means am I an expert on Photoshop. I actually learned it not too long ago, so I'm not an expert, but I'm just giving a tutorial based on what I know. But also, before we get started, I would like to introduce what my photo montage / collage is about. So for those of you who do or do not know, I am an Indonesian woman, and I believe that the women rights movements and essentially just human rights movements going on in Indonesia right now mean a great deal to me. So I feel like it is appropriate to make a collage about what is happening in the country that my parents grew up in. So moving on to the first bullet point, Indonesia is one of the countries with a history of gender violence, high occurrences of child marriage, and gender discrimination. The second bullet point reads, with the recent rise in women's movements, there has been a push towards the equal gender and political representation. So essentially, the women's rights movements going on in Indonesia mean a lot to me, and it inspired my collage art that I will show you all right now. So see you all in the next clip. Alrighty, moving along to the second part of the presentation, I will be doing a tutorial on how to create a digital collage. Now, starting with a blank canvas, I am copying and pasting patterns. This particular pattern is known as the batik, and it is from Indonesia, and this pattern is usually used in special events on cultural garments. I thought this pink one with flowers I think they're flowers. I think the pattern is really cute. And then I'm just adding the map of Indonesia. And adding another one, but I flipped it horizontally this time, just for special effect. I also decided to add a cute graphic I found on Google. I thought it fit very well with the theme of this collage and thought, why not add it? With Photoshop, you are able to access many features such as changing the hues of your photo and layering, especially with collaging. On the lower right hand side, you can see all the layers I have for the background, and right now I'm just fiddling around with the adjustments, like the color, and there are some gradient adjustments. You can adjust the brightness, the contrast, and the like. Right now I'm just looking at the blue tones and seeing what's that like. Most of my process when making art, it's a lot of trial and error, especially digital art, because you have the ability to undo things. So if you don't like how something turns out, you can undo what you did and start again. So as you can see, I wanted to go for a more faded look, for a vintage and almost old feel. I wanted the background to look more of like old paper, like yellowing paper, or maybe it's something that you found in the back of your mom's or grandma's closet. Wanted it to feel vintage like, which is why I also looked up dust PNG on Google and decided to incorporate the PNG into the collage. Just working on the background right now and blending the PNG with the image, kind of rearranging the dust particles to make them look appealing. Although it's barely noticeable, I think it adds a really nice effect. I also think adding the dust PNG brings the whole image together. Now that I am satisfied with my background, I will be going over my layers, but first I wanted to add currency because since we are talking about equal rights, equal pay falls into equal rights for women, especially in Indonesia, which is why the movements are going on right now. And now I'm just adjusting the hues so the new image that I added matches the background. Right now I am grouping all of my layers and merging them to make them one giant layer. And now I am naming it, and then I will lock the layer so it stays in place. Fun fact, the pause was me looking up how to lock a layer on Photoshop. Alrighty, moving on to the top layer of our collage. I copy and pasted a photo from Google that I found. Now moving in with the pen tool, I am sectioning a part of the image that I would like to keep in the collage. I like using the pen tool more than the freehand select tool or freehand draw tool because I think I get more preciseness in my cutting versus me trying to precisely draw an outline with my mouse. Basically, the clicking pen tool gives me more control over the areas that I can cut. And now after outlining the area that I would like to keep, I am making a selection and making sure the pixels are 0 so I get a sharp and clean cut. You may notice that the area that I outlined deleted, and that is because you need to first copy the image and then paste it. Because when you outline a section of the image, you're essentially deleting it, to my understanding, in Photoshop. So what I did was I copied the image that I cropped and selected, and then pasted it, and then hid the layer that I didn't need. Little tip, if you would like, you should delete layers that you aren't using or you're hiding, because it saves a lot of space and a lot of confusion. Now I'm going in with some more graphics. Fun fact, this one translates to Perempuan Bersatu, and that translates to Women in Unity. Here I am again playing with the hues and the color contrast. I also like to fiddle around with the layers to see what looks best, and rearranging each layer either on top or below one another to see which works best. I do fiddle a lot with the color throughout the tutorial of the collage because I wanted to go for a theme. I wanted a majority of it to be pink or salmon colored, and that was the theme that I was going for, with hints of teal or blue and yellowish, orangish tones. Right now, I was just thinking about what I wanted to do next. I was just looking at what's missing or what should I delete or add. I decided to add another photo from Google, and I am doing the same thing that I did before with the pen tool and clicking and outlining the area of the photo that I would like to keep. I am making a selection and double checking that the pixels are 0 so I can get a nice clean cut. Hide the layer, and there you go. Another outlined picture, and I wanted to refrain from zooming in and having a clean cut with things. And montages have scattered elements on one canvas. I think it gives a nice feel to it. Here I am pasting some more photos that I found on the internet and just putting those layers behind the top layers of the collage. Right now I am pasting some ransom note letters because when I think of collage, I think of cut and paste, and ransom letters came into mind, so cutting and pasting letters from ransom font generators online felt like it was a cool addition to the collage. And now I'm just spelling out equal rights with the letters that I pasted from the font generator. I am also grouping some letters and moving them around. I'm also playing around with the size and seeing what works, or the angle. And then I merged all the layers with the individual letters as one whole layer, so I can just grab one part of them and move all of them. Here I'm just trying to figure out where I would like to put this layer. I realize that this looks kind of messy on the bottom and you can't read it, and I wasn't able to also read much of it in that position, so I'm just trying to figure out what I should do next. I thought it would be a good addition to add the Indonesian flag because we are highlighting movements in Indonesia, particularly women's rights movements that advocate for equal rights, and I felt that it was necessary to add the flag on the collage. And here I'm just playing around with the size and moving the layer behind other layers. And also readjusting whatever needs to be readjusted. And I duplicated a layer and brought that down to apply to the other layers in the collage. And now I'm just playing around with the color again, making things seem more unison. I'm also pasting the same photo I did earlier in front of the flag because I thought it would add a little bit more flair and character to the collage. Here I am trying to find what I want to do with the picture. Do I want to blur it? Do I want to change the color of it? For this image, I decided that it would be best if I blended it with the white part of the flag. And now I'm just finding a setting that fits best. Now I'm just rearranging the photo and playing around with the size so it doesn't look too big. Going in with the same photo, I will be doing the same thing that I did with the other photo, but using a different blending option. But first, I decided to crop an area that I needed and delete a part of the photo that I didn't need. Just a quick reminder, instead of hiding your layers that you don't need to use anymore, it's best just to delete them on the spot to avoid any confusion and clutter of layers. I went ahead and added another batik print. This one has cute little flowers on them, and the three main colors of this print are navy blue, gold, and white. I used that print to cover the bottom of the cut and give the collage more depth. Or more elements. Maybe depth was not the right word, but more elements. And now I'm playing with the gradient. I was debating if I wanted to use the gradient feature and seeing where it would fit best. I think this would look great as a flyer if it were just one gradient, but since it is a photo montage, collage, or digital scrapbook, I decided to keep the colors. Here I am again, just experimenting with the gradient. I was having really fun with it because, if I'm being quite honest, I didn't really understand it and I thought it looked really cool, so I was just playing around with it right now. Still trying to figure out where I can incorporate this by adding it in between layers. Alrighty. So I had to place the batik print where it was before again, and then now I'm just rearranging how things look on the screen, tidying things up. So right now I am debating if I would want to have one or two flags on the collage. So I made a duplicate of the flag and I'm trying to see if I could maybe fit it in somewhere. After moving it around a few times, I decided to stick with one flag for the collage. Here I am playing around with the colors again. It's honestly really fun for me to play around with the colors because I was trying to see what worked best for the collage as a whole and make all the elements seem in unison with each other. Going back to the gradient feature, I was still trying to see if I could include it because I thought it was really cool. And so I really wanted to try and incorporate that into the collage, but I figured that it would be best if I waited and had more practice with it before I start using it. Now I'm just making some final touches. I am splitting up this image because I think it's fairly large and I wanted to shorten it. And so I decided to keep the text and put that there. And then now I am going to add the rest of the image and cut out the logo or the graphic. Using the pen tool again. I have more confidence when I use the pen tool in outlining things because when I freehand my outlines with the mouse, it's shaky and I don't like how they turn out. Here I am just trying to figure out where to put the graphic, debating if it should be in the middle, on the side, next to the words. But I decided to delete it because I didn't really like its placement. And then rearranging the flag. And now playing around with the brightness and the contrast. Also playing around with the hues and the color of the collage. Here I am going back to the gradient tool. I was trying to check if I could use it again or see if I could use it one more time, but at this point I was fairly confused and well, spoiler alert, I end up deleting this layer. Yep, deleted the layer. Right now I'm just looking at the image, seeing what needs to be done. Do I need to add anything? Do I need to delete anything? I decided to add another dust PNG to tie everything together and make things seem in unison. And so the elements of the collage aren't too stand-outish, or elements of the collage don't stand out too much from each other. Because when I make a collage, I want the elements to be in harmony on the canvas versus sing each other out. And now I am done, and I decided to save my work and title it Digital Collage. I saved it. Thank you all for joining me in the tutorial, and here are my sources. And these are the sources for the photos that I used in the digital collage or scrapbook, photo montage, lots of similar names. Okay, and that concludes the entire presentation. I hope you all learned something or found something interesting. Follow us on our social media. Our Instagram is at UCSD Cross Cultural Center. Our Facebook is facebook.com/UCSDCCC. And check out our YouTube channel by going on the link tinyurl.com/UCSDCCCYT. Thank you.